Chess. To Americans, it was at most a casual pastime, a casual game to almost every American except Bobby Fischer. To the Soviets, it was not just a game. The Bolsheviks promoted it as state policy, and Lenin was very much into the game. The Soviets saw it as a potent form of diplomacy. Champions were crowned as national heroes, and in 1972, one in particular, Fischer-Spassky, held the world title. Yet he was not interested in the political matters connected to chess. The debate of ideologies between the US and the Soviet Union was not one he wanted to be involved in. Being so dominant in chess, all he wanted to do was concentrate on his game, and in that sense, he was not a true Soviet. The weight of the world crown was already heavy enough without the added political pressure. And it was in 1972 that Fischer made it to the World Championship match to try to relieve Spassky of that weight. Their respective governments claimed to care little about their skirmish. The US and Soviet Union officially stated that the match was not too significant in the Cold War. What could a wooden board game do to influence the far more expansive debate of the West versus communism? However, the worldwide press coverage and attention, the rallying of the people behind their respective players, and the support for both players from their respective governments, despite government stances and Fischer and Spassky not being ideal individuals, asserts that the match was an incredibly vital theater of diplomacy in the debate of ideologies in the Cold War. In 1972, Richard Nixon was president. The burglary at the Watergate office was developing wider implications. There was political upheaval in Chile. The Vietnam War now included a bombing of Cambodia. And the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union showed no signs of thawing. Just a year prior, China had established good relations with the US through a ping pong match, and it only further deterred the Soviets. Moreover, while the Soviets long had an absolute grip on the chess world, there suddenly was a boisterous, stubborn, young American from Brooklyn who was running through their ranks. He had beaten superstar Grandmaster Mark Taimanov 6-0, and was now claiming himself to be the best player in the world, as well as spewing anti-communist beliefs. Fischer's platform grew at an astronomical rate, and he began using it as a form of diplomacy for his own personal agendas. And because many of his goals lined up with those of the American public, soon Americans embraced him and endorsed him as a way to win the debate with the Soviet Union. Thus, although Spassky was a good Russian but not a true Soviet, the Soviets nevertheless embraced and supported him as the Soviets' last chance of stopping the madman they believed was Fischer, and in a larger sense, the US, at least intellectually. Spassky was the last chance to successfully use chess as an act of diplomacy to win the intellectual aspect of their debate with the Americans. Yet the match almost never took off, literally. First, Fischer refused to play for such a measly prize fund. But the match was so important that his demands forced the British millionaire to double the prize fund before he agreed to play. Then he demanded special hotel accommodations, including a pool just for himself. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger even had to call him, and in his own words, for the worst player in the world to convince the best player in the world to play. And finally, right before he boarded his flight to Reykjavik, Iceland, Fischer suddenly got suspicious of the Soviets and refused to board that flight. The flight took off without him and crashed due to an engine failure. When Fischer finally arrived, the mind game started. He walked confidently to the opening ceremony, straight past Spassky, only to turn around a few seconds later and shake his hand. One observer described it as Fischer looking every bit like a superstar, while Spassky looked like some guy asking him for an autograph. Nevertheless, once the match got underway, Spassky seemed to be alright, and he won the first game due to a careless blunder by Fischer. He took game 2 as well when Fischer didn't show up, complaining about the noisy cameras distracting him. Spassky seemed to be well on his way to securing the title, and all his Soviet advisors told him to take the free victory. But suddenly, Kissinger called Fischer again, begging him to stay in the match, and with the help of Spassky agreeing to Fischer's accommodations, the match resumed in Game 3.
Its happening was really due to Spassky and his good sportsmanship. The Soviet Chess Federation, the Soviet government really wanted him to go home and just take the title by forfeit.
From then on, the body language of the players said it all. Spassky started losing confidence bit by bit, while Fischer seemed to grow taller and taller, towering over him.
No, we both knew it.
Or did you see it on the same
move? We both
move?
knew it. It was just kind of a heartbreaking loss for him, and he wanted to drag it out of him. So.
Yeah.
Such
Wipe that smile off
passivity
your-
would doom any debate, and this case was no different.
Spassky is literally sitting on the edge of his chair, which seems a little more relaxed than Spassky, but Spassky is very tense.
More tense than you've seen him?
Yes. I think he feels that he...
Spassky resigned the match without resuming the game, and Fischer was left accepting the world title without his opponent across from him. A single man had done the impossible: defeat an entire army of Soviets. He had successfully used chess as a weapon of diplomacy to poke gaping holes in the Soviets' argument of superiority. His victory swung the tide of the debate between the US and Soviet Union. Chess in the US took a massive leap. Everyone and their grandma was suddenly interested in the game.
One thing that did happen because of the 72 match, there was that a lot of young players started playing at that time. And players like Larry Christensen, Yasser Seirawan, Nick DeFermian, John Fedorowicz, Joel Benjamin, the list goes on. Those players became mainstays of American chess for several decades. And they, allowed the United States to win a lot of medals.
Fischer's victory rocked the Soviet Union and made them retool and rethink their strategy. They now had a much more challenging time claiming their intellectual superiority in their debate with the Americans, and Fischer's successful act of diplomacy gave the US a lot of faith in the inevitably long debate that was the Cold War. His win contributed to the US policy of containment created from fear of the domino theory, since the Soviets' intellectual loss in the debate made communism less appealing to other nations.
And they're the ones who've been using chess as a propaganda weapon. They finally turned against them,
Of course, the Soviets disagreed and they tried to minimize the significance of the match. They still believed they had the upper hand, and indeed the Soviet Union did not collapse until 1991. There were still many influential events to come, such as the hockey match between the US and Soviet Union in 1980 that symbolized the political rivalry played out in a different arena. But in a time of instability, Fischer's victory, at the very least, provided a much-needed morale boost to the American public and helped control the spread of communism through containment.
So there were newspapers. There were a lot more newspapers then than there are now. And there was no cable TV, or if there was, it was like very rudimentary. But there was major broadcasting networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. And so those venues, the newspapers and the TV, and magazines as well, they really covered the match heavily. And I think there's a couple of reasons why they did that. One was because Spassky was a Soviet citizen and Fischer was an American. And that was at the height of the Cold War.
Fischer supercharged an unprecedented boom in American chess, and his victory cemented the US an upper hand in their debate of ideologies with the Soviet Union. While the Soviets may disagree, the boost that he provided to American morale cannot be denied, and America's eventual triumph just goes to further underline his contributions. Through a unique form of diplomacy, Fischer's win contributed to the dominance of capitalism today. We take so many things for granted, such as freedom, democracy, and opportunities, but it pays to look back sometimes and appreciate people like Bobby Fischer, who helped shape the world the way it is today.